He traded his last 2 chickens for a wife. That's not a figure of speech. In the Montana Territory, back in 1867, a man's desperation could be measured by what he was willing to part with, and Jacob Mackenzie was down to his last 2 hens. He thought he was buying a housekeeper, a quiet woman to cook his meals, mend his clothes, and fill the soul-crushing silence of a cabin haunted by ghosts. Someone to help him survive the coming winter, a winter the old-timers swore was going to be the kind that killed anything left exposed. But the woman who stepped off that wagon wasn't quiet, and she wasn't just a housekeeper. Catherine Walsh arrived with secrets locked away tighter than a bank vault, a mind sharper than a whetted knife, and a past that was hunting her across a continent. She wasn't just going to challenge Jacob's lonely life on a failing ranch. She was going to burn it to the ground. And from the ashes, something would rise that would change the West forever. Jacob Mackenzie's boots sounded like gunshots on the porch. Each step cracked the morning silence. The August sun was already baking the dust on his ranch, turning the whole world a tired shade of brown, gold and dust. That's all Montana was. The gold couldn't buy back his wife, Mary, and the dust was what she'd become. 6 months. 6 months since the typhoid fever had ripped through his life like a wildfire, taking Mary and their boy, Tommy, leaving Jacob with nothing but crooked fence posts and memories that cut him up inside. He ran a hand over his face, the sleeve of his shirt coming away grimy. Everything was falling apart. The ranch. Him. He looked over at the chicken coop. 2 hens scratching in the dirt. Soft, clucking sounds that felt like they belonged to another man's life. They were all that was left. The cows, the pigs, the horse. All sold. Sold for medicine that didn't work. For a doctor who came too late. His hands shook as he threw some feet on the ground. "Come on, girls," he whispered, his voice rough. "At least you 2 are still here." But for how much longer? The wind kicked up, a lonely sound whistling through the broken slats of the barn. He squinted at the mountains, purple and distant. Somewhere out there, families were living, eating, laughing. The thought made his stomach clench. The kitchen table was too big for one man. The silence was too loud. He'd tried talking to Mary's picture on the mantel, but her painted smile offered no comfort, no answers, just a constant, silent reminder of everything he'd lost. Then a sound. Dust on the road, a cloud of it, rising like smoke. A visitor. Out here, visitors meant one of 2 things, business or trouble. Jacob's hand instinctively went to the pistol on his hip. You learned to be careful when you were the only living soul for miles. It was a fancy wagon. Canvas top, pulled by 2 horses that looked like they'd never missed a meal. The man driving it wore a city hat and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Everything about him screamed out of place. "Good morning, friend," the man called out, waving like they were old pals. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Jacob didn't answer. The word beautiful had been burned out of his vocabulary. The stranger hopped down from his wagon. He moved like a man who believed the ground was lucky to have him on it. "Name's Cornelius Briggs," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm in the business of solutions. Solutions for folks in difficult situations." "Not interested," Jacob said. He knew the type. Vultures who circled struggling ranches, waiting to pick the bones clean for pennies on the dollar. Briggs just laughed, a dry, rustling sound. Now, don't be so hasty. I haven't even told you what I'm offering." His eyes scanned the ranch, taking in the decay, the emptiness, the sadness. "I can see you're a man who's had a rough go of it lately." Jacob's jaw tightened. Small towns had big mouths. Everyone knew about Mary and Tommy. Everyone knew he was failing. The pity felt worse than the grief. "What do you want?" Briggs stepped closer, his city boots crunching on the hard-packed earth. "I want to help you, Mr. Mackenzie. I specialize in, shall we say, domestic arrangements." The words hung in the air, cold and strange. Jacob had heard whispers. Traveling salesmen who dealt in more than just pots and pans. Men who preyed on the desperate. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jacob lied. "Oh, I think you do." Briggs's gaze shifted to the chicken coop. "Those are fine-looking birds you have there. Healthy." An ugly feeling twisted in Jacob's gut. "They're not for sale." Briggs's smile widened. showing teeth that were a little too white. Who said anything about selling? I'm talking about a trade, a fair exchange. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You're 2 chickens, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. For a wife. The offer was obscene, insane. Jacob should have pulled his gun, should have ordered the man off his land, but a small, desperate voice in the back of his mind wouldn't let him. Winter was coming. The bank was circling. And the loneliness. The loneliness was a cancer, eating him alive from the inside out. What? What kind of woman? Jacob stammered, hating the weakness in his own voice. The kind who needs a home just as much as you need a companion, Briggs said smoothly. A young lady from back east, fallen on hard times, unfortunate circumstances. 2 chickens for a wife. The phrase echoed in Jacob's skull. It was shameful. It was wrong. But as he looked at his empty yard, at the silent house filled with ghosts, he realized something terrifying. It might be his only chance. The bank letter was like a rattlesnake in the mailbox. Red stamp, angry and final. Jacob didn't have to open it. He knew what it said. Final notice. Pay up or get out. The words were a brand on his soul. He sat at the kitchen table, the letter lying next to one from his sister Ruth. Her neat script was full of soft words about starting fresh and civilized living. He knew what she meant. Give up, sell the ranch, come live with her like a stray dog she'd taken in out of pity. The coffee in his cup was stone cold. He drank it anyway. It was better than whiskey. Whiskey was a deep, dark hole, and he'd seen too many men fall in and forget how to climb out. Outside, the wind howled, a lonely sound for a lonely man. They said it was going to be a bad winter, the kind of winter that tested a man's soul. He wasn't sure he had enough soul left to be tested. His mind kept going back to Briggs, to his sickening offer, 2 chickens for a bride. He felt his skin crawl just thinking about it. But desperation is a powerful acid. It burns through pride, through morals, through everything you thought you stood for. He looked out the window at the 2 hens, his last connection to the life he'd built with Mary. No more eggs, no more soft clucking in the morning, but maybe no more eating alone. He picked up a pen to write to Ruth, then put it down. What would he say? Dear sister, I'm thinking of trading our last remaining livestock for a human woman. Hope you are well. She'd have him committed. The lamp flickered, throwing shadows that looked like grasping hands. He saw his reflection in the dark window pane. A ghost. A man who'd aged a decade in 6 months. The spark Mary had loved was gone, snuffed out by grief. He remembered her laughing, chasing Tommy through the mud in the yard. He remembered the look in her eyes, a look that said he was her entire world. What would you do, Mary? He whispered to the empty room. What would you want me to do? But the dead don't give advice. He walked to the bedroom and pulled a small wooden box from under the bed. Mary's jewelry, her wedding ring, a simple gold band, caught the light. He could sell it, buy himself a few more weeks. But the thought of it made his chest feel like it was collapsing. Some things couldn't be sold. 3 days. Briggs had given him 3 days. 3 days to decide between his pride and his survival. He blew out the lamp and sat in the darkness. The wind rattled the windows, a constant, mournful song. Tomorrow he would have to make a choice that would change everything. The morning mist hung over Miller's Creek like a shroud. Jacob's hands trembled as he tucked the 2 hens under his arms. Their feathers were soft, their bodies warm and alive against his cold dread. Each step toward the creek, toward Cornelius Briggs's wagon, felt like a step toward the gallows. What kind of man had he become? The wagon was there, a dark shape by the water. Smoke curled from a small campfire. The smell of frying bacon hit him, and his stomach roared in protest. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. Mr. Mackenzie, Briggs called out, his voice offensively cheerful. I had a feeling you'd come. Coffee? Jacob shook his head. His hands were shaking enough already. The chickens felt like they were made of lead. So, Briggs said, wiping his greasy hands on a rag, have you made your decision? The words caught in Jacob's throat. The chickens, he finally managed to say. For the woman. Briggs's smile was predatory. Excellent choice, my friend. You won't regret it. He reached for the birds and Jacob flinched, holding them tighter for a second before letting them go. What's her name? The question surprised him. He hadn't meant to ask. Miss Catherine Walsh, Briggs said, caging the hens. Fresh from Boston. Educated, well-mannered. An excellent cook, I'm told. He winked. You're getting a real bargain. Boston. Educated. The words didn't fit. What was a woman like that doing here, being traded for livestock? Why would she... Circumstances, my dear fellow. We all have our circumstances. Briggs's tone was dismissive, as if her story didn't matter in the slightest. Now, shall we complete our business? He turned to the wagon. And one more thing, he added, his back to Jacob. She's not what you think. Good luck. Before Jacob could ask what that meant, the canvas flap on the back of the wagon rustled. A hand appeared first, pale, slender. It pushed the canvas aside. Then a face, and Jacob Mackenzie forgot how to breathe. She wasn't beautiful like the saloon girls in town, all paint and cheap perfume. This was different. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, pulled back so tightly it must have hurt. Her eyes were green, the color of new grass after a spring rain, but they held a sadness that looked ancient. She was maybe 25, with fine, sharp features that hinted at a life far removed from this muddy creek bank. Mr. Mackenzie, she said. Her voice had an accent, clean and crisp, like biting into a cold apple. I am Catherine Walsh. She climbed down from the wagon, her movements full of a strange, defiant grace. Her dress was simple and worn, but she held her head high, her chin tilted up as if daring him to judge her. He saw that her hands, though clean, were trembling slightly. She was just as scared as he was. Ma'am, he managed, touching the brim of his hat. An old habit, something his mother had taught him. They stood there in a silence so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Briggs bustled around, eager to be gone, treating the whole scene like a simple livestock sale. I suppose we should discuss terms, Catherine said finally. Her voice was steady, businesslike. It was unnerving. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. She was negotiating. I don't rightly know what the terms are, Jacob admitted, feeling like a fool. None of us ever thought we'd find ourselves here, she interrupted, her voice softening just a little. But here we are. Briggs finished packing and climbed onto his driver's seat. Well, my work here is done. Mr. Mackenzie, treat her well. Miss Walsh, you've got yourself a good man. He paused, then handed down a small, battered leather trunk. Everything you own in the world, I'd imagine. The cruelty of the remark made Catherine flinch. Jacob felt a surge of protective anger. This woman, his wife, he supposed, deserved better than this. Thank you for your services, he said, his voice dripping with ice. My pleasure. Briggs tipped his hat and snapped the reins. I'll be heading toward California, if anyone asks. As the wagon rumbled away, Jacob and Catherine were left alone. The mist was burning off, revealing a world that looked the same, but felt entirely different. Well, Catherine said, picking up her trunk. It seemed heavy. Jacob reached for it. Let me. I can carry my own things, she said, her grip tightening on the handle. It wasn't just a trunk. It was the last piece of her old life, and she wasn't letting it go. He nodded, respecting the small act of defiance. They started walking back toward the ranch, the silence stretching between them. Just so we are clear, she said, not looking at him. I do not expect romance. I understand this is a practical arrangement. I will cook, I will clean, I will manage your household. In return, I expect a roof over my head and your protection. Her words should have been a relief. It's what he wanted, wasn't it? A housekeeper, a helper. But for some reason, her cold, practical terms made him feel hollow, empty. Understood, he said. But as he stole a glance at the strange, proud woman walking beside him, he had a sinking feeling that neither of them understood a single thing about the terrible bargain they had just made. Catherine Walsh stood in the doorway of the cabin and looked at it the way a doctor looks at a corpse. Her green eyes missed nothing. The dust on the furniture, the cold hearth, the single plate and cup on the table. It's very rustic, she said finally. It was a polite word for depressing. It's not much, Jacob said, the shame burning in his gut. Through her eyes, his home looked like a hovel, a place where hope had come to die. Dirty dishes in the basin, clothes draped over a chair. The whole place smelled of loneliness. She set her trunk down with a soft thud. It was a small trunk, but it looked solid, heavy. She never let it out of her sight. She removed her thin coat. Her dress underneath was patched, her shoes scuffed. Whatever had happened to her in Boston, it had stripped her of everything. "Where should I sleep?" she asked. The question hung in the air, thick and awkward. In his bed, the bed he'd shared with Mary? The thought felt like a betrayal. "The bedroom's through there," he said, pointing. "I'll sleep out here, on the floor." She looked surprised. "That is not necessary. I am sure we can come to an arrangement." "It's no trouble," he cut in, too quickly. The thought of sharing a room, let alone a bed, with this complete stranger was impossible. She nodded, a flicker of something, relief, in her eyes. "Thank you. That is very considerate." She picked up her trunk and carried it into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Jacob busied himself with the fire, listening to the soft sounds of her unpacking, the sounds of another person in his house. It was a strange music. When she came out 20 minutes later, she had changed into a simple work dress, an apron tied neatly around her waist. "I shall start on lunch," she said, her gaze sweeping over his pitifully stocked kitchen. "What do you normally eat?" "Whatever's handy," he grunted. She opened the pantry. Her posture stiffened. A few sprouting potatoes, a can of beans, the last of the flour. She made a small, almost inaudible sound of dismay. "When did you last go to town for supplies?" He had to think. 3 weeks ago, maybe 4. "I see." Her voice was neutral, but he could feel her judgment. "Well, we shall make do for today, but a trip to town is imperative." She set to work with a quiet, unnerving efficiency. It was clear she knew her way around a kitchen. He watched her, feeling like a stranger in his own home. This was his space. Now it was hers, too. "You don't have to do this," he said. She paused, a wooden spoon in her hand. "Do what, Mr. Mackenzie?" "Cook, clean, any of it. I know this isn't... You didn't choose this." She was quiet for a long moment. "Neither did you," she said, her eyes meeting his. "But we are both here, and we both need to eat." Her practicality was like a splash of cold water. He'd expected tears, hysterics. Instead, he got competence, as if she'd faced worse things than this and had learned to simply get on with it. "Tell me about the ranch," she said as she worked. "How much land? What do you grow?" He found himself telling her everything, about the cattle he'd sold, the failed crops, the dreams he and Mary had shared. She listened, her head tilted, asking sharp, intelligent questions, questions that showed she knew about farming. "You worked a farm back east?" he asked. "My father had some land," she said, her hands stilling for a moment, "before he lost it." The pain in her voice was a raw, familiar thing. "I'm sorry. Things happen," she said, but her shoulders were rigid. "We adapt, or we do not survive." Lunch was potato soup. It was simple, but it was the best thing he'd eaten in 6 months. They ate in silence, the space between them filled with unspoken questions. Every time their eyes met, they both looked away. That night, as he lay on the hard floor, listening to the sound of her soft breathing through the thin wall, Jacob stared into the darkness and wondered what he had done. Catherine Walsh was a puzzle. She was educated, but she knew how to work. She was proud, but she had allowed herself to be sold for 2 chickens. She was tough, but he could see the fear she tried so hard to hide. And she was fiercely protective of that little leather trunk. He had seen her checking the lock on it before she went to bed. He'd seen the way she positioned it in the corner of the room, almost like a guard dog. What was in that trunk? What kind of trouble had followed her all the way from Boston to his broken-down ranch in the middle of nowhere? He had a feeling the coming winter wasn't the only storm he needed to worry about. The scream ripped through the morning quiet like a bolt of lightning. It was Catherine. Jacob was in the barn, but he was through the door and halfway to the house before the sound had faded. He burst through the cabin door, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his chest, pistol already in his hand. She was backed into a corner of the kitchen, her face a mask of pure primal terror. Her hand was over her mouth, and her eyes were wide, fixed on something on the floor. "What is it?" he yelled. She couldn't speak. She just pointed a trembling finger toward the woodpile by the hearth. Something moved in the shadows. Jacob's blood ran cold. He saw it then, a coiled shape, the dry, dusty diamond pattern on its back. The sound started a moment later, a deadly whisper that every man on the frontier knew to fear. The sound of a rattlesnake, ready to strike. It was a big one, thick as his arm. "Don't move," he breathed, raising his pistol. His hands were rock steady, an island of calm in a sea of adrenaline. "Not 1 inch." The snake's head rose, its forked tongue flicking, tasting the air, measuring the distance. Catherine was frozen, a statue carved from fear. The shot was an explosion in the small cabin, a deafening crack of thunder. Wood chips flew from the wall as the snake's head vanished in a spray of red. Its body thrashed for a few horrible seconds, then went still. The echo of the gunshot seemed to last forever. Catherine slid down the wall, her legs giving out. Her face was as white as bone china. Is it dead?" "Stone dead," Jacob said, nudging the corpse with his boot to be sure. He looked down and saw a gap between two floorboards near the corner. "Came up through there, looking for warmth." The fear in her eyes was slowly being replaced by something else, a hard, cold anger. She pushed herself to her feet and walked over to look at the dead snake, her hands balled into tight fists. "In Boston," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength, "the most dangerous thing in my kitchen was a mouse." He almost smiled. "Welcome to Montana, Mrs. Mackenzie." The name slipped out. He hadn't meant to say it. They had been Jacob and Catherine, careful strangers sharing a space. The title felt heavy, real. She looked at him, her eyebrows raised. "Mrs. Mackenzie," she repeated, tasting the words. "I suppose that is who I am now." "Only if you want to be," he said quietly. "I know this isn't a real marriage." She stared down at the snake, at the brutal, sudden violence that had just invaded her kitchen. When she looked back up at him, something in her gaze had shifted. A wall had come down. "Real or not," she said, her voice low and intense, "I was about to die, and you saved my life. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, shaking her head, "not anyone. You didn't hesitate. You protected me." She paused, her green eyes searching his. "Like a husband would." The words hung in the air between them, more powerful than the gunshot. In that moment, something changed. The bargain felt less like a business transaction and more like something else, something he couldn't put a name to. They cleaned up the mess together. She insisted on helping, her jaw set with a grim determination that impressed him. This was no fragile city flower. This was a woman who could face down the ugly parts of life and scrub the blood off the floor afterward. As they worked, she started to talk. Really talk. She told him about teaching school in Boston, about her father, a good man with a weakness for gambling, about the night men had come to their house and taken everything. "I slept in the schoolhouse for 2 weeks," she said, her voice flat, devoid of self-pity. "The headmaster, he made me an offer, a place to stay in exchange for services, services that were not part of my teaching duties." Jacob stopped hammering a new board into place. "What did you do?" A bitter smile touched her lips. "I told him precisely where he could put his offer. I was dismissed for moral failings." She looked him straight in the eye. "I answered an advertisement for a domestic housekeeper position out west. It promised a new start. It didn't mention I'd be part of a trade. I didn't know the truth of it until I was already in Mr. Briggs's wagon, halfway across the country, with no money and nowhere else to go." The truth settled over the room like dust. She hadn't been a willing participant in this sordid bargain. She'd been trapped, deceived. "I'm sorry," he said. It felt horribly inadequate. "Are you?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. "Yes." She seemed to consider his answer. "I believe you are." She looked around the small cabin, at the newly patched floor, at the fire crackling in the hearth he had just built. "Ask me again," she said, a faint wry smile on her face. "Ask me again if I'm sorry I came, after I've survived my first Montana winter." That evening, the silence by the fire was different. It was easier, companionable. Jacob, she said softly. What was she like? Your wife? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. No one asked about Mary. They acted like she'd never existed, afraid to stir up his grief. She was, he struggled for the words. She was like sunshine. She could find something to be happy about in the middle of a drought. She made this place a home. You loved her very much. It wasn't a question. More than breathing, he whispered, the words raw and torn from a place deep inside him. When she died, I thought I'd die too. Catherine reached out, and her hand rested on his for just a second, a small, warm gesture that felt enormous. She wouldn't want you to stop living. How do you know? Because that's not how love works, she said quietly. Real love wants the other person to be happy, even when you can't be there to see it. He looked at her, this woman who'd been so brutally tricked, speaking of love with such wisdom. Did you ever love someone like that? A shadow passed over her face. Once, a young man in Boston, a teacher. We were to be married. She shrugged, a gesture that didn't hide the pain. When my father's scandal came to light, his family decided I was no longer suitable. It is amazing how quickly love can wither when it is not convenient. He was a fool, Jacob said with a surprising amount of venom. Perhaps, she said, staring into the flames, or perhaps he was merely practical. Love, I have found, is a luxury not everyone can afford. They sat there for a long time after that. Two people shipwrecked by life, sharing the warmth of the same fire, each wondering if they could ever learn to sail again. But outside, the world wasn't finished with them. A few days later, Jacob rode into town for the supplies they desperately needed. Old man Hemlock, who ran the general store, pulled him aside while Catherine was examining bolts of fabric. Jacob, the old man whispered, his eyes wide with gossip. There was a man in here yesterday, a stranger, asking questions. What kind of questions? Asking if anyone had seen a new woman in the area, a woman from Boston, educated, reddish hair. Hemlock leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. Said he was a Pinkerton agent. Jacob's blood turned to ice. He looked over at Catherine, who was blissfully unaware, her fingers tracing the pattern on a piece of calico. A Pinkerton agent, hired guns, manhunters. They didn't get called in for gambling debts or scandalous affairs. They got called in for serious trouble. He paid for their supplies, his mind racing. On the ride back to the ranch, the silence in the wagon was thick with his unasked questions. Catherine seemed to notice his mood, casting worried glances at his grim face. When they got back to the cabin, he confronted her. A Pinkerton was in town, Catherine. He was looking for you. The color drained from her face. She stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her throat. For the first time, Jacob saw true naked fear in her eyes, the kind of fear that had nothing to do with snakes or harsh winters. This was the fear of a hunted animal. What did you do? He demanded, his voice harder than he intended. What kind of trouble are you in? She sank onto a chair, her composure finally shattering. My father, she whispered, her voice breaking, his gambling debts. They weren't to bookies. They were to a man named Silas Blackwood, a very powerful, very dangerous man in Boston. He runs half the city. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to continue. My father couldn't pay, so Blackwood offered him a deal. He would forgive the debt if my father used his position as a shipping clerk to alter some manifests, to make certain cargo disappear. What kind of cargo? Her eyes were haunted. Guns, smuggled rifles, heading south. It was treason. Jacob stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Briggs, the suspicious need to disappear. The Pinkerton. My father refused, Catherine continued, tears now streaming down her face. He was a good man, just weak. When he refused, Blackwood had him killed. They made it look like an accident, a fall at the docks. But I saw them. I saw Blackwood's men leaving my father's office that night. I was hiding in the closet. She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of terror and defiance. I am the only person who can testify against Silas Blackwood, the only one who can put him away for murder and treason. She gestured to the small leather trunk in the corner. My father kept a ledger. He wrote everything down. Names, dates, shipments. It's all in there. It's the proof. Suddenly, Jacob understood everything. Her fierce protection of the trunk. Her fear. Her desperation. She wasn't just a woman who'd fallen on hard times. She was a witness on the run for her life. And Cornelius Briggs hadn't sold him a wife. He'd sold him a target. So the Pinkerton, he began. He's not a real Pinkerton, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He works for Blackwood. He's not here to arrest me. He's here to kill me, and to get that ledger. Jacob looked from her terrified face to the cabin door. His isolated ranch, which had once felt like a prison of loneliness, now felt like a death trap. He hadn't just brought a stranger into his home. He had brought a war. The blizzard came out of the north like a ghost, silent at first, then with a howl that sounded like the end of the world. The sky turned a sickening shade of white-gray, and the snow began to fall, not in flakes, but in a solid, blinding sheet. I have to check the animals, Jacob yelled over the rising shriek of the wind. The few chickens they'd managed to buy and their single milk cow wouldn't last an hour if the barn door blew open. He'd strung a rope from the house to the barn, a lifeline in the whiteout. Jacob, don't! Catherine cried, her face pale with fear. It's too dangerous. Wait it out. Can't, he said, pulling on his heaviest coat. They'll freeze. He plunged into the storm. The cold was a physical blow, stealing his breath. The world disappeared. There was no sky, no ground, only the swirling, roaring whiteness in the rough guide rope in his hands. He made it to the barn, the wind trying to tear him from his feet. The animals were safe, huddled and frightened. He secured the door, adding an extra board to brace it, his fingers already numb and clumsy with cold. The trip back would be harder, fighting against the wind. He took his first step out of the barn, and the world exploded. A massive gust of wind, stronger than the rest, ripped a loose section of the barn roof free. A heavy timber, coated in ice, crashed down. He tried to jump back, but it was too late. It struck his leg with a sickening crack, and he went down into the snow, the pain so intense it made him black out for a second. When he came to, he was half buried in a snowdrift. He tried to move his leg. The pain was a white-hot fire that shot all the way up to his hip. Broken. It was definitely broken. The cold was seeping in now, a deep, deadly chill that was far more dangerous than the pain. He tried to call out, but the wind snatched the sound from his lips and tore it to shreds. He was 20 yards from the cabin, 20 yards from safety. It might as well have been 1,000 miles. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. This was it. This was how he would die. Frozen in a storm, just like his ranch, just like his dreams. Inside the cabin, Catherine was pacing like a caged animal. He'd been gone too long, far too long. Every gust of wind that slammed against the walls sounded like a fist, trying to break in. She stared out the window, but there was nothing to see but a wall of white. Then she heard it, a sound that wasn't the wind, a rhythmic splintering crash. The barn door. The brace must have given way. It was slamming against the frame, which meant Jacob was in trouble. Without a second thought, she wrapped herself in her heaviest coat, tied a scarf over her face, and grabbed the rope. She plunged into the frozen hell. The cold was brutal, a monster trying to swallow her whole. She couldn't see, could barely breathe. She just held on to the rope and pulled herself forward, step by agonizing step. Jacob, she screamed, her voice a tiny thing against the storm's fury. Jacob, where are you? She found him behind the barn, a dark shape in a deep drift, his face already pale and tinged with blue. My leg, he gasped, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. It's broken. Can't move. She didn't waste a second on fear. Panic was a luxury. Put your arm around my shoulder, and she ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. We are getting you inside. Too heavy, he protested, his words slurring. Leave me. Save yourself. Like hell I will, she snarled, the cursed words sounding strange and powerful coming from her lips. You saved me from that snake. I'm saving you from this storm. Now get up. Somehow she did it. Fueled by adrenaline and a terrifying, desperate strength, she got him to his feet. He leaned on her, a dead weight, his pain-filled groans lost in the wind. The journey back was a nightmare. Every step was a battle against the wind, The snow, the crushing weight of him. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed. "Talk to me, Jacob," she commanded, knowing that if he passed out, they would both die. "Keep talking. Tell me about Mary. Tell me about your son." "Mary loves storms," he mumbled, his consciousness fading. "Said they made the world clean again. Tommy was afraid of thunder. Mary would sing to him." "What did she sing?" Catherine yelled, half dragging, half carrying him. "What did she sing, Jacob?" "Amazing Grace," he whispered. Catherine started to sing. Her voice was thin and reedy against the gale, but she sang the hymn with all her might, the words a shield against the killing cold. She sang it all the way to the cabin door. Getting him inside and onto the bed was another Herculean effort. She stripped off his frozen clothes, wrapped him in every blanket in the house. His leg was bent at a sickening, unnatural angle, but it was his skin, waxy and white with patches of gray, that terrified her. Frostbite. "Stay with me, Jacob," she pleaded, rubbing his frozen hands between her own. "Don't you dare leave me alone in this place." For the next 6 hours she fought for his life. She heated water, wrapping his hands and feet in warm cloths. She forced hot coffee down his throat. She set his leg as best she could, using floorboards from the barn as splints and tearing strips from her own petticoats for bandages. And as she worked, a strange, grim thought entered her mind. The medical supplies. Jacob had an old chest where he kept liniment and bandages. It was locked. He'd said the key was lost long ago. She needed what was inside. With a grunt, she took the fire poker and broke the lock. Inside were a few dusty bottles of laudanum and some yellowed bandages. But underneath them was something else. A book, a small leather-bound diary. The handwriting was feminine, elegant. It was Mary's. Catherine knew she shouldn't. It was a violation, a sacrilege. But Jacob was shivering, his breathing shallow, and she was desperate to do anything to keep him connected to the world, to keep her own mind from succumbing to the terror. She opened the diary, and the world shifted on its axis. She read about Mary's life on the ranch. She read about her love for Jacob, yes, but she also read about her suffocating loneliness, her frustration, her feeling of being trapped. "This place is a prison," Mary had written, "a beautiful, sun-drenched prison. Jacob sees a dream, a legacy. I see a cage. He loves this land more than he loves me. I cannot breathe here anymore." The last entry was dated just a week before she and Tommy got sick. "I have made my decision. I have written to my sister in Ohio. Tommy and I will go to her. I cannot tell Jacob. It would break him. But I cannot stay and let my own heart break instead. We will leave next month after the harvest." Catherine stared at the words, her blood running cold for a reason that had nothing to do with the storm. Mary had been planning to leave him. The perfect marriage. The unbearable grief. It was all a story built on a fragile foundation. Jacob wasn't just grieving a wife he had lost to sickness. He was grieving a wife he had been about to lose anyway. It explained his desperate, almost pathological need to hold on to the ranch. It wasn't a dream he was protecting. It was a memory, a fiction, a lie he told himself to survive. She looked over at Jacob, sleeping a fitful, feverish sleep. He wasn't a simple, grieving widower. He was a man just as broken and complicated as she was. A man who had built his life around a story that wasn't entirely true, just like her. "Oh, Jacob," she whispered, her heart aching with a sudden, overwhelming wave of empathy. She put the diary back in the chest. It was a secret she would keep for him, a burden she would help him carry, even if he never knew it. As she tended to his fever, she realized that she was no longer just fighting for his life because he was her husband by bargain. She was fighting for him because, in the space of one terrifying day, he had become something more. He had become her partner in survival, her fellow liar, her unexpected, broken, and dangerously precious home. The storm raged on, but inside the small cabin, a different kind of storm had just passed. And in the quiet aftermath, something new and fragile had begun to grow. The first sign of the wandering stars was the color. After a long, hard winter that had bleached the world to shades of white and gray, the sight of their wagons rolling up the road was like a sunrise. They were painted in brilliant reds and blues and yellows, with ribbons streaming from the rooftops. The people riding in them were dressed in clothes that seemed to have been spun from jewels. "Jacob," Catherine called, her hands covered in flour. "We have visitors." He hobbled to the window on the crutch he'd carved, his leg healing but still weak. His face, which had been slowly regaining its life, clouded over with suspicion. Visitors meant trouble, but this wasn't trouble. This was something else entirely. The lead wagon stopped, and a woman jumped down. She moved with the liquid grace of a cat. She had a mane of wild, dark hair, skin the color of warm honey, and was draped in so many scarves and silver bracelets that she chimed when she walked. "Good morning, beautiful people," she called out, her voice a rich, musical alto with an accent Catherine couldn't place. "I am Magdalena Rossi, and we are the Wandering Stars, musicians, storytellers, and merchants of joy." Catherine felt a giddy, unfamiliar bubble of excitement rise in her chest. This was life. This was the world beyond the ranch, a world she had almost forgotten existed. "We seek only shelter for the night," Magdalena continued, her hands gesturing dramatically. "In return, we will fill your quiet evening with music that will make your heart weep and stories that will make your spirit soar." "We don't have much room," Jacob said, his voice gruff, but Catherine could see the flicker of interest in his eyes. The winter had been long and silent for both of them. "Room is not what matters," Magdalena laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "What matters is the generous heart, and I can see you both have generous hearts." Before they could answer, the rest of the troop was spilling out of the wagons, a tall, mournful-looking man with a fiddle case, a woman whose hands were permanently stained purple from dyes, a pair of twin boys who looked like they were made of mischief and wire. "Please," Catherine heard herself say, stepping out onto the porch, "you are welcome to camp in our yard." Magdalena's smile was dazzling. "Blessings upon you, cara mia. Tonight we will remind you what it means to be alive." The rest of the day was a blur of magical chaos. The wandering stars transformed their drab yard into a kaleidoscope of color and sound. Tents sprang up like mushrooms. A fire pit was dug, the air filled with the smell of exotic spices and the sound of the fiddle player, Yeppe, tuning his instrument. Catherine found herself helping Magdalena prepare the evening meal, chopping vegetables next to this force of nature. The older woman moved with a purpose and a joy that was hypnotic. "You have sadness in your eyes, Piccola," Magdalena said softly, not looking up from the onions she was dicing. "This life, it is not the one you dreamed of. No?" Catherine's hands paused. "Dreams are a luxury I have learned to live without." "Ah, but dreams are not luxuries. They are seeds," Magdalena said, her voice warm. "They can lie dormant for many years, waiting for the rain. Your seed is still there. I can see it." That evening, as the stars began to pop out in the vast dark sky, the performance began. Yeppe played a melody so heartbreakingly beautiful, it felt like it was pulling something from Catherine's soul. Then the woman with the purple hands, Maria, began to sing. The language was foreign, but the emotion was universal, a song of loss and longing and defiant hope. Without thinking, Catherine began to hum along. Magdalena's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Come, cara mia," she said, her voice carrying over the music. "You have training, I can hear it. Share your voice with us." Catherine froze, her cheeks burning. "Oh no, I couldn't. I used to sing, but that was a long time ago." "Music is not a coat you can take off," Yeppe said kindly. "It lives in the blood." They all encouraged her, their faces open and welcoming. She looked at Jacob. He was watching her, his expression one of intense curiosity. He nodded slowly. "Go on." Shaking, she stood up. Yeppe began a new melody, a soft, searching tune, and Catherine opened her mouth. She sang an old Irish ballad, one her grandmother had taught her. The words came back to her like long-lost friends. Her voice started out small, trembling and thin, but as the song went on, it grew. It swelled with all the grief, all the fear, all the loss she had locked away inside herself. The voice that came out of her wasn't just trained, it was magnificent. It soared over the valley, a pure, crystalline sound filled with a tragic beauty that silenced the night. When the last note faded, there was a moment of stunned silence. Then the wandering stars erupted in applause. Madonna mia, Magdalena breathed, her hand over her heart. You have a gift, child, a gift from God. Catherine looked at Jacob. He was staring at her as if he had never seen her before, as if she had just transformed from a brown sparrow into a bird of paradise right in front of him. That was, he said, his voice thick with emotion, that was beautiful. And in his eyes she saw something that made her heart stop. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't respect. It was awe. Later that night, after the fire had burned down to embers, Magdalena sat with Catherine. You could come with us, she said quietly. We travel to San Francisco, to the mining camps in California. Men pay in gold to hear a voice like yours. It is a hard life, but it is a free life, a life for an artist. Catherine's heart leaped. The thought of it, the travel, the music, the freedom, was a dizzying, intoxicating possibility. Then it crashed back to earth. I can't, she whispered. I am married. I have a husband. Responsibilities. Magdalena looked at her dark eyes seeming to see right through to Catherine's soul. She gestured to the small leather trunk Catherine had brought out from the cabin to keep close by. On the side of the trunk, nearly worn away, was a small, embossed symbol, a star with a winding serpent. I know that symbol, Magdalena said, her voice dropping lower. I have seen it before. It is the mark of those who travel the hidden roads, those who need help to disappear. Catherine stared at her, speechless. We are more than musicians, Piccola, Magdalena said. We are guides. We help people like you. People running from powerful men. People who need to become ghosts. Her eyes flickered toward the dark road leading from town. We heard whispers about a man asking questions, a hunter. Catherine's blood ran cold. They knew. Our offer is not just for a singer, Magdalena said, her voice now deadly serious. It is an offer of passage, of safety. The man who hunts you will not stop. He will find this place. You must leave. With us, you will be one of many faces. You will be safe. The choice was suddenly no longer about dreams versus duty. It was about life versus death. As Catherine slipped back into the cabin, her mind reeling, she saw that Jacob was awake. He had been by the window. He had heard everything. The look on his face wasn't anger or betrayal. It was a look of profound, soul-crushing sadness. You should go with them, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper in the darkness. And Catherine felt her heart break in two. I can't just leave you, Catherine whispered, the words feeling thin and useless in the heavy silence of the bedroom. Why not? Jacob's voice was rough, brittle. You think my leg is a good enough reason? It'll heal. The ranch, he let out a bitter, humorless laugh. The ranch is dying anyway. It has been since Mary, since before. He pushed himself up in the bed, the moonlight from the window carving deep shadows into his face. He looked older, worn down to the bone. I heard them, Catherine. They can protect you. The man who's hunting you. I have a pistol and a broken leg. That's all I have to offer. That's not true, she said, her voice fierce. You've given me a home. You've kept me safe. For how long? He shot back. Until he shows up with 2 more men? I brought you into this, buying you from Briggs. This is my fault. No, it's not your fault. I was running long before I met you. She sat on the edge of the bed, the space between them feeling like a canyon. Magdalena's group, they can help me disappear. Start a new life. A life of singing, he said quietly. A life you deserve. I see the way you look at the mountains, Catherine, like you want to see what's on the other side. There's nothing for you here but dust and ghosts. What about you? She asked, her voice breaking. What happens to you? I'll manage, he said, the words sounding hollow. I managed before. I'll manage again. That wasn't managing, she said, the truth of it sharp and painful. That was waiting to die. You know it was. His silence was her answer. He had been a ghost in his own life, and she knew it. She had brought him back, slowly, painfully. And now the only way to keep him safe was to leave him, to let him slide back into the gray emptiness. You are a good man, Jacob Mackenzie, she said softly. You deserve happiness. Maybe I'm not meant for it, he said, looking away from her, out the window at the dark shape of the mountains. Maybe I used up all my luck with Mary. Is that what this is about? She asked, a sudden anger cutting through her fear. Are you pushing me away because you're afraid? Afraid to let someone else in? Afraid they'll leave you too? He flinched as if she'd struck him. When was the last time you really looked at me? She pressed on, the words tumbling out. Not as a housekeeper, not as a bargain you made, but as me, as Catherine. He finally turned to look at her, and in the pale moonlight, she saw the battle raging in his eyes. I look at you, he said, his voice cracking, all the time. Then tell me what you see. He took a shaky breath. I see a woman who is too good for this place. I see someone who can stand in a storm and sing it to silence. I see someone who deserved a hell of a lot better than being traded for 2 chickens. He reached out, his rough hand gently touching her cheek. And I see the only thing that has made me feel alive in a very, very long time. The confession hung between them, beautiful and terrible. Then why are you telling me to go? She whispered, tears burning her eyes. Because I love you, he said, the words ripped from him, raw and bleeding. And because loving you means wanting you to be safe. It means wanting you to be free, even if that means I have to, even if it means I can't have you. A sharp knock on the cabin door made them both jump. Catherine! Piccola! It was Magdalena. The sky grows light. We must be on our way before the sun is high. This was it, the moment of choosing. Life on the run with the wandering stars, or a life here, waiting for a killer to arrive. It wasn't a choice at all. I have to go, Catherine said, her heart shattering. I know, Jacob whispered. But as she stood up to leave, the sound of hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Not the gentle shuffling of the performers' horses, but the hard, urgent gallop of a single rider pushing his mount to its limit. A man on a dark horse pulled up, silhouetted against the graying dawn. He wasn't one of the wandering stars. He was dressed in dark, practical clothes, a rifle resting in a scabbard by his saddle. It was the man from the general store, the Pinkerton, the hunter. He had found them. Magdalena cursed softly in Italian from the porch. Jeppe, the fiddler, didn't reach for his instrument. He reached for the shotgun stashed in his wagon. The man dismounted, his movements calm and predatory. His eyes scanned the camp, dismissing the performers as irrelevant, and then locked onto the cabin door. He saw Catherine standing there. A cold, thin smile touched his lips. Catherine Walsh, he said, his voice carrying in the cold air. Mr. Blackwood sends his regards. He'd like his ledger back. Jacob was already moving, grabbing the old rifle from above the fireplace. He was clumsy with his crutch, his face a mask of grim determination. Get back inside, he hissed at Catherine. But she was frozen, staring at the man who had come to kill her. This was the end of the road. Now we can do this easy, or we can do this hard, the man said, taking a slow step forward. I just want the book and the girl. No one else has to get hurt. Suddenly, one of the twin boys let out a yelp and pointed at the sky, his eyes wide with fake terror. Look, an eagle! It was a childish, absurd distraction, but it worked. For a split second, the hunter's eyes flickered upward. In that second, all hell broke loose. Jeppe fired the shotgun, not at the man, but at the ground right in front of his horse. The horse screamed and reared, its eyes rolling in terror. Simultaneously, Maria, the dyer, threw a handful of powdered pigment, a blinding, brilliant purple, directly into the man's face. He staggered back, yelling and clawing at his eyes, temporarily blinded. Go! Now! Magdalena screamed, shoving Catherine toward the back of the cabin. Out the back! Run for the creek! Jacob fired his rifle over the man's head, the shot echoing through the valley. He was trying to provide cover to buy them time. The hunter, recovering, fired back blindly, the bullet splintering the door frame inches from Jacob's head. The wandering stars were not just musicians. They were a well-oiled machine of chaos and escape. They swarmed, creating confusion, knocking over barrels, their colorful costumes a swirling distraction. Catherine grabbed her trunk, her heart pounding. Jacob was limping toward her, his face grim. Go with them! They can get you away. I'm not leaving you, she screamed back over the shouting. You have to. He shoved a small pouch of money into her hand, all the money he had in the world. Live, Catherine, go and live. The hunter was clearing his eyes, his face a grotesque mask of purple dye and fury. He raised his pistol, aiming directly at Jacob. There was no time to think. Catherine did the only thing she could. She dropped her trunk, ran forward, and threw her body against Jacob's, knocking them both to the floor as a gunshot exploded through the space where his head had just been. They lay there, tangled on the floorboards, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. The hunter was coming. It wasn't a choice between love and dreams anymore. It was a choice between dying together or dying apart. The ledger! The hunter roared from outside, his voice laced with fury. Give me the ledger and I'll let the old man live. Jacob scrambled to his knees, pushing Catherine behind him. His rifle was on the other side of the room. He was armed with nothing but a crutch and a desperate suicidal courage. Stay behind me. It's over, Jacob, Catherine whispered, her body trembling. He'll kill us both. No, he said, his eyes wild. He wants the book. Give it to him. If I do, he'll kill us anyway. There can't be any witnesses. He was right. They were trapped. The wandering stars were creating a brave diversion, but they were performers, not fighters. It wouldn't last. Then Jacob's eyes fell on the fireplace, on the roaring fire they'd built against the morning chill. A crazy, desperate idea sparked in his mind. The book, he said, his voice low and urgent. Open your trunk. Her hands shook so badly she could barely work the key into the lock. She threw the lid open. Inside, nestled among her few worn clothes, was the leather-bound ledger. The book that had cost her father his life. The book that was about to cost them theirs. Give it to me, Jacob said. He took the ledger, his eyes never leaving the front door. He could hear the hunter getting closer. What are you going to do? Catherine breathed. For an answer, he limped to the hearth. Without a moment's hesitation, he threw the ledger into the heart of the flames. No! Catherine screamed, a raw, anguished sound. The proof, her father's justice. It was all turning to smoke and ash. The pages curled, blackened, and then burst into orange-yellow flame. Now he has no reason to let us live, she cried, despair washing over her. Yes, he does, Jacob said, a strange, fierce grin on his face. He grabbed the heavy iron poker from its stand. Now he has to take you back to Boston alive. The front door burst open. The hunter stood there, his face a mask of purple-stained rage, his pistol leveled at Jacob's chest. The book! Too late, Jacob said, gesturing with the poker toward the fireplace. It's gone. The man's eyes darted to the fire, saw the burning remains of the ledger. A guttural scream of pure fury escaped his lips. His entire mission was a failure. Blackwood would have his hide. You fool, he snarled. You've just signed your own death warrant. Both of you. I don't think so, Jacob said. Blackwood wanted the book to disappear. It's disappeared. But he also wanted the witness silenced. Now, without the book, her testimony is just a story. But if she disappears too, if she's killed out here in the middle of nowhere, that leaves loose ends, questions. And men like Blackwood hate questions. He was bluffing. It was a wild, desperate gamble, but it was all they had. He'll have to take you back, Jacob continued, his voice steady, even as sweat poured down his face. He'll have to deliver you to Blackwood personally. It's the only way he can prove he did half his job. The hunter hesitated. The logic, twisted as it was, made a certain kind of sense. He couldn't go back to Boston with nothing, but he couldn't leave a living witness behind either. That hesitation was all Jacob needed. With a roar, he swung the heavy iron poker, not at the man, but at the main support beam of the porch roof, just outside the door. He'd known it was rotten for years. The wood splintered with a sickening crack. The hunter, startled, took a half-step back onto the porch, and the entire roof collapsed. Timber, shingles, and a winter's worth of heavy melting snow came down in an avalanche of debris. The hunter disappeared with a choked scream. Silence. Jacob and Catherine stared, dust and snow settling in the sudden, shocking quiet. From outside, Magdalena's voice called out, cautious and frightened. Hello! What has happened? Slowly, Jacob hobbled to the ruined doorway. The hunter was buried, pinned under the heaviest beam, moaning in pain. He was alive, but he wasn't going anywhere. The wandering stars crept closer, their colorful costumes smudged with dirt, their faces a mixture of terror and awe. Jeppe looked at the wreckage, then at Jakob, who stood breathing heavily, leaning on the poker like a king on a scepter. "Sweet mother of God," the fiddler whispered, "you brought the whole house down on him." It was over, for now. But they all knew it wasn't a real ending. Blackwood would send more men. The next ones wouldn't be alone. "We have to go," Magdalena said, her voice firm. "All of us. The road is not safe for us in this territory anymore." She looked from Catherine to Jacob. "For any of us." Catherine looked at the smoking remains of the ledger in the fireplace. Her proof was gone. Her chance for justice was gone. But she was alive. Jacob was alive. She looked at the ranch, the broken porch, the bullet-scarred door. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a battlefield. "Jacob," she started. He was already shaking his head. "This place, it was Mary's dream," he said, and for the first time he spoke of it without the weight of crushing grief. "But it became my prison. I see that now. My future isn't here. It was never here." He looked at her, his eyes clear and full of a love so fierce it took her breath away. "My future is with you, Catherine, wherever you go." An hour later, a second rider appeared on the road. It was their neighbor, Mr. Peterson. He'd heard the gunshots and had come to investigate, rifle in hand. Jacob met him in the yard. "Jacob, what in God's name happened here?" Peterson asked, his eyes wide at the scene of destruction. "Just a little spring cleaning," Jacob said, a wry smile on his face. He looked at the pinned hunter, who was now being tied up by Jeppe and the twin boys. "Had a bit of a pest problem." He then looked Peterson in the eye. "You still interested in buying this place?" Peterson was stunned. "You're selling?" "I'm leaving," Jacob corrected. He named a price. It was low, ridiculously so, but it was fair. Peterson, seeing the look in Jacob's eyes, didn't haggle. He agreed on the spot, promising to have the money delivered by sundown. The price of the ranch wouldn't make them rich, but it would be enough. Enough for a new start, enough to buy their freedom. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the valley, Catherine climbed into one of the wandering stars' wagons. Jacob, his leg propped up and bandaged, was settled beside her. His crutch lay at his feet. Her small leather trunk, now empty of its dangerous secret, was tucked under the seat. The hunter was trussed up and left for the sheriff, along with a note explaining he was a wanted man from back east. A slight exaggeration, but one that would keep him tied up in legal trouble for months. Magdalena clicked the reins, and the colorful caravan began to move. They rolled past the crooked fence posts, past the bullet-scarred cabin, away from the ghosts and the grief and the life that had almost destroyed them both. As they headed west, toward the promise of San Francisco and the vast unknown horizon, Catherine leaned her head on Jacob's shoulder. He put his arm around her, holding her tight. The price of 2 chickens had brought her to him. The price of a ranch was setting them free. She began to sing, not a sad ballad of loss, but a song of the open road, a song of hope and new beginnings. Her voice, clear and strong, soared into the twilight. Jacob joined in, his rough baritone a perfect harmony. Soon the whole troop was singing, their voices rising together as they disappeared into the endless western sky. They didn't know what the future held. They only knew they would face it together. 2 broken people, bought and sold and hunted, who had fought their way through the storm and found not just survival, but a love that was more real and more precious than any dream of a ranch or any promise of justice. A love forged in fire and worth more than all the gold in California. If you enjoyed this story and you want to hear more tales from the forgotten corners of the past, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You never know what secrets are buried out there, just waiting to be told.